Hey everybody, welcome back to the newest PSMA webinar. Today we have KeyBank. They are a preferred bank. And we have Nathan Rock, who is the National Sales and Service of Cash Management Leader. Did I say that right, Nathan?
You did, yep.
Perfect. Well, he's here to help us with just learning some valuable information regarding cybersecurity, and we're going to play a video as well, so we can just really get a full understanding of how we can be guarded and regarding cybersecurity.
Thanks, Meg. I just want to quickly introduce kind of what we're going to go over today. So the number one requested information that we get is around fraud. Fraud is growing rapidly. More and more companies are experiencing it, and it's coming in so many different forms in ways that most of us can't even imagine. And so we put together this seminar back in October highlighting how fraud can happen and things that you need to look out for to make sure that your company is protected and up to date on what's going on in unfortunately the new world that we live in, where our information is constantly attacked and we need to be self-guarded against that. So we're going to start this quick seminar, and then we will get back with you once it's done.
So let me start by introducing myself. I'm Tammy Gadetsis. So I'm here at KeyBank, and I'm in charge of cybersecurity education and awareness. Here on the panel today with me, I'm very excited to introduce Kelly Urich, who is the Deputy Security Information Officer here at KeyBank as well. And then we also have a special guest joining us today. We have David Kennedy, who is a professional computer hacker, and he's also the founder of TrustedSec and Binary Defense. I won't go through all of the wonderful things that you've done, but he's been featured on a lot of different news channels and been in front of the government. I mean, you do it all. You're a professional.
I'm very fortunate
in the field.
about being able to be a good hacker. So.
That's good. That's good. But a good hacker.
Good hacker.
That's right. And just as a teaser, later in the session, we'll actually talk about a special offer that your company is providing for those that are listening to the webinar today.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. So during today's session, we're really going to talk about the new norm of fraud and the cybersecurity landscape. So it's really something that we're seeing happening every single day. You see it on all of the news channels, you read it in all of your emails. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the headlines. We'll talk about the method of attack. So what are these threat actors doing that are, to get into your company and to get to your information? Then we're going to bring it into reality, and David's going to give us a live phishing simulation. Then we'll talk a little bit about how do you protect yourself? What should your company be doing and you be doing personally to think about, what's happening in that landscape? So what are those protections? What should be in your toolkit for your company? And then we'll talk more about investing in that strategy and what you should be doing. And then we'll follow it up with Q&A that you'll be able to enter via chat.
Sounds exciting.
So, we already know that there's a lot of activity happening, but the threat landscape is really only getting bigger. If you think about, years ago, we probably had to worry about just, one person having maybe a home computer, maybe a laptop at work, and then a cell phone. But now really, as you start to think of the new Internet of Things, as it's called, and all of our devices are now connected to the Internet in some way, whether it's your Ring doorbell, where you hear everybody's pocket going off when somebody's at their front door, or whether, refrigerators, just everything is now connected to the Internet. So I think what we need to remember is that that's just widening the amount of kind of entry points for hackers. You can see on here 38.6 billion devices are expected to be connected by 2025, which isn't that far away. And it's no longer strong enough to just have things like antivirus, and I know we're going to get into best practices, but really thinking about it the way we thought about it before, of just, those couple of devices is no longer, you can no longer think that way. We really need to change the way we're thinking for companies to protect themselves.
it's really boundaryless now, right? I mean, it used to be you could very clearly understand your network and you secure outside in, inside out, and you're good to go. Well, now with everything being so connected, there are no boundaries anymore, so you really have to take a strong look at the entire environment and all the connectivity, including like your third-party partners, right? Their fourth-party partners, and how they may have access to your information or have access into your environment and what that does overall. But there's no boundaries anymore, so it's definitely a lot more challenging to secure and a lot more easier to compromise.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think you look at some of the less sophisticated ones. You look at business email compromises, for example, and with business email compromises, there's a lot of ways that these can occur. You might be impersonating a CEO saying, hey, you know, you need to wire out $5 million, and you know, spoofing the email address, going to somebody within your finance department saying you need to, you know, wire $100,000, $5 million out to your organization, and here's the locations to do it, and don't tell anybody it's a super secret merger and acquisition. Or you have other ones which are more harder to detect, that are more sophisticated, where they'll actually compromise a trusted third-party vendor of yours, right? And you already have established communication. You've already worked with them in the past. You've already probably sent them money in a number of ways through invoices. And so these hackers will go in, they'll say, listen, I need you to send money to this new location now. We change banks, and to wire money to these specific locations. So, you know, a lot of those pieces all have really different sophistication levels, but then you have hackers that are directly breaking in for monetary gain or for intellectual property theft. You know, all of those things together really make a big picture for what we're trying to face today from most of our companies.
Yeah. Significant.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, when we think about specifically for this audience, as we're talking to business clients, you know, they're really concerned with payments fraud. We're going to talk about all of the other things as well, because payments fraud, I think there's been a lot of focus on that, but obviously we're going to talk about the different ways in which we see those things happening. But I mean, 423 million in wires. I think a lot of that goes back to what you were just talking about, business email compromise. That's one of the largest kind of drivers to where we're seeing the fraud occurring in the wire space. But I know more recently, too, we're also seeing from a business email compromise, not only in the wire space, which is where they kind of hit first, but then we started to see them move more to payroll. So they're also starting to hit ACH in a similar way, but now it's maybe hacking into the third-party vendors and then trying to go after payroll files or change this personal employees through social engineering and then having them change those. We still have things like obviously check fraud. I don't think until checks finally go away, we're going to continue to see that happening because, right, wherever there's that least resistance, they're going to continue to go. If there's a way to make money, they're going to still continue to do that. So I don't know if there's anything to add here, but I think we're still continuing to see the payments fraud. Basically anywhere that money is going to be exchanged, we're going to continue to see them attempt to.
Yeah, I think it's prolific, right? I mean, it's a major challenge, and it's very difficult to secure because they're using a lot of social engineering techniques. They're just going directly after individuals' sense of urgency, right? And as much as we try to educate around that, it's still a very effective and easy way for them to get at what they need.
And even on the newer payment apps that you have, you know, the apps that you can make payments for online, you know, being able to scam people through that. I had a family member recently where they bought tickets online for a concert show using the payments for these new things, and they weren't able to get refunded for them specifically, and they were fake, you know, payments. They had a mobile app, and they had the QR code and everything to get into the actual concert, and they went to go scan the concert, and they're fake tickets. So whenever anybody can make money off of these types of things, they're going to go and do, and you know, we have to build protections around that to ensure our safety.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the methods of attacks. I don't know if either one of you want to jump in here. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about the business email compromise, but obviously we're still seeing phishing happening. Phishing, I think, is going to continue to happen.
Phishing is highly effective, right? I mean, it's fairly easy for them to execute, to get credentials or to get you to click on a link. I mean, and they're getting more sophisticated. It used to be, you know, you could clearly tell it was a scam, a Nigerian prince, or, you know, things of that nature, right? Misspellings all over the place. But in recent, I've seen some really sophisticated ones, some really well-crafted phishing emails that, you know, could be very effective.
Yeah.
I think one thing to take away from this webinar, if you're listening, is that social engineering is probably one of the biggest risks that we face in our companies. And the reason why it's so bad is that if you think about it, you know, your IT folks and things like that have a firewall, and your firewall then protects people behind that firewall. But when you click a link or you open up a document that has code in it that executes on the system itself, they now have access behind that firewall and access to all of your systems that you traditionally have in order to do your work and do your business. And that's why it's so damaging, is that one person can literally be an entire downfall of an entire organization. And so it's important for us to recognize that, listen, one person may install malware on accident, may have malware on accident, and all of those things can really cause a major issue when it comes to our company. So education awareness becomes really important. We'll talk about ways that we can get better with what we're experiencing out there. If you look at business email compromises, education around your finance department, around wiring money and procedures in place to be able to protect those. So again, we'll get into some of those. But from a social engineering perspective, it's by far the easiest way for us to get into an organization time and time again. You look at the Sony breach, for example. One user, again, the rest of Sony got hacked and completely compromised. It just causes one person to be the cataclysmic downfall.
Yeah, absolutely. People is definitely a common theme in making sure your employees are aware of what's happening and testing them. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yep.
All right, so that takes us into the live simulation.
So one thing we wanted to show here before we start the actual demo itself is that one of the big ways that we as attackers compromise your organization is through sending attachments through email. And so what attackers will typically do is they'll send you an email and then it'll have some sort of sense of urgency, as Tammy mentioned right before. So hey, you really need to make sure that you're doing this. It's a specific thing around your health benefits. It's something to do with your Office 365 account. There's a number of different ways that we try to create a sense of urgency. It might be human resources related. There's a lot of ways that attackers can do this. And so in this example, what I'm going to show you is how easy it is for attackers to craft something. And what's going to happen is I'm going to have two machines here. I'm going to have a Linux machine and a Windows machine. And on my Linux machine, I'm going to be creating something that is called a listener that listens to catch a communication that somebody successfully falls for. So when I send an email to somebody, the victim opens up that document. In this case, it's going to be an Excel document. And then as soon as they hit enable macros, which macros are embedded into Excel, which basically allow you to see your charts and graphs and things like that, it'll allow us to basically attack that computer and compromise that computer. So we can go ahead and hit play. So when we go ahead and this is an attacker's machine, what we're going to do is we're going to be launching the attack specifically from the attacker's machine. And this is going to allow us to handle any communications back and forth. So when I send a phishing campaign out, I want to catch as many people as I possibly can. And so on the other side, on the Windows machine, when we go over to here, all I'm going to do is simulate opening up an Excel document, a random Excel document, and on the top you can see enable content up here. As soon as we hit enable content, there's going to be an error message that pops up. It's just a fake error message saying this is an old version of Excel. Have the creator start a new one. And as soon as you hit OK on that, you go back to the attacker's machine, and we now have full access to your computer. And we can enable the webcam, we can listen to conversations, we can enable the audio on the device itself. We have the full ability to basically get any information that we want to off of that computer itself. So it's a way that hackers use, again, once you just open up just a simple document that you think has information via Excel or Word, all of those things are all possible for us as hackers to take advantage of that. So knowing exactly where it comes from, knowing who actually sent it, all those things become really, really important. And so one specific thing on this one is that Excel macros are probably one of the most prominent methods for infection that we see from hackers. Sending a macro that comes to your computer that you open up and get sent off are one of the key ways. Harvesting passwords as well. Office 365 is a really good example of that. They'll say that you have to log into your Office 365 account, and then they'll steal your username and password and try to log in and harvest your emails. Again, all of those things that you need to be really careful of when you're going through it. And one thing with the demo there that I wanted to kind of explain is that hackers have these toolkits that allow you to attack organizations in a number of different ways, and they're readily available. You can go and buy them. And think of it as a demographic of different attackers where if you look at the Carter market, which was primarily used for stealing credit cards, a lot of retailers got really smart and started employing encryption to get rid of those. And so the hackers that were developing all the software were out of a job. And so recently, we've seen a lot of hackers that are more sophisticated really doing ransomware as a service, where they'll actually build sophistication for tools for less sophisticated hackers. And then you can go and buy the package, and then you get a certain percentage of those cuts. So it's, again, an online business demographic that you can use to make money in any way, shape, or form. So.
That's reassuring that they're helping each other out.
And it's a community of hackers working together to try to help each other make more money.
So just continuing with the theme of phishing, I mean, you saw how quickly David was able to get in there, and we can't see the slides, we saw how quickly David was able to get in there and actually, within minutes, right, go in and plan an attack. And when you think about that, the scary part of the phishing, as we said, is it just takes one employee to go ahead and click on that. But the cost of that attack could be anywhere, as we're showing on the screen, anywhere from 1.5 to 3 million. Because if you think about it, it's not just what they have access to in the computer. We're also thinking about things of reputation risk, depending on what type of information you have on your clients and what they've gained, just depending on what access they get into and what they're able to get a hold of, it could be very damaging to your company. And you can see also from a reputational standpoint that, as we've all seen in the news, when one of these breaches happen and you find out that your information has been exposed, you see a lot of clients could potentially leave you based on that breach. So it's very costly to you as a business from a reputation perspective, regaining that trust when something like this happens. It's more than just the dollars and cents of what information they can actually get from it, or potentially, money that they may steal from your company.
Yeah. And some things to consider with that live demo too. When you're getting an email from an individual that you don't recognize or you haven't had a communication with before, be careful of opening those types of attachments, right? In that Excel example, macros, for example, when it says enable security content, you don't necessarily need to enable that security content to get the contents of that document. As soon as you hit enable content, that's when it actually compromised your computer. So hitting X on that comment would have stopped that specific attack from happening. But looking for key red flags, I think it's important to note. Seeing who's actually sending you the email itself, making sure it's actually coming from that person.
Yeah. Looking at the link, right, to make sure it's a reputable link and not, fraudulent.
The hover over technique. If you get an email, even if it says it's going to KeyBank.com, for example, you hover over, make sure it's actually going to that location.
Right.
Make sure it's not going to a malicious place that you don't intend to steal your credentials. Your usernames and passwords are really important. One thing I'll also say too, common ways that attackers break into banking accounts is by having the same password everywhere. We're all probably guilty of that in many cases, but having the same password everywhere can make a big deal when it comes to the types of information you have. If you have the same Twitter account as your same banking account, and that Twitter account becomes compromised, and all of a sudden now you have a compromise in a lot of different areas. So.
Yeah, especially as we bleed the lines between, it's not like you're at home and you're a consumer and you're wearing your personal hat and then you switch into a different hat and then go into the office, right? So the same habits and things you're doing in one place are something that you're carrying forward with you in the workplace.
Well, and it's very easy too, based on all of that information that you can gain about somebody just by doing a couple of Google searches, right?
Absolutely.
You can use that information then, attackers use that to turn that around and embed that into the email to look like they know the person or they are a different person or, and convey that sense of urgency or, personalization so you feel like, oh, okay, I need to respond to this.
Right.
One thing I saw recently that I thought was really unique is that hackers were sending emails, both to businesses and personal individuals, with the person's password in the subject line. And that person's password would come from a already compromised website. So the website would be like, let's just say you register for some widget online and you use your username and password to log into that, or you have an iOS app or an Android app that you log into and you create a username and password there. One of those sites had gotten compromised. And hackers had access to the usernames and passwords. And what they were doing is saying, hey, I've been watching you and I've been on your computer for the past 6 months and here's your password. It would actually be a password that you use somewhere. So people start to freak out, like, are they on my computer? Have they actually hacked me? I had a number of family members reach out to me for those specific ones. And it had nothing to do with you or your computer, and your computer wasn't compromised, but the fact that they knew something that was private to you caused a real sense of urgency. And it's those types of things that attackers use to really get you.
Yeah, and they're pulling on that human element, right? It's that sense of urgency that, oh, I got to do something right now about this. We've also seen too a lot of phone compromise, phone fraud, right, where they'll call in to a client and it looks like it's coming from KeyBank. It'll show up KeyBank on caller ID, but it really is a spoofed. It's a spoofed number. It is not actually Key. So Key would never call you and ask you to provide a password or your login information or anything like that. But you look on caller ID, it says Key. It looks legitimate. So again, that sense of urgency, and believability.
Oh yeah, makes a huge difference.
It does.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit about what should you have in your toolkit and how should you be protecting yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the biggest things is passwords. I mean, password reuse, as you alluded to earlier, David, is really a challenge today. I know that we have all done it. It's difficult to remember a short, complex password. So we're encouraging industry best practice of moving to passphrases. So just simply by extending your password to 15 characters makes it infinitely harder for a hacker to compromise. And if you move to a passphrase, which is something that may be easier for you to remember, like food is the key to my heart, it's easier for you to remember, and it's way more secure. So that's one of the big things is moving over from standard passwords to passphrases.
Yeah, keeping your password like summer 2019 exclamation point or Cavs 2019 exclamation point. You know, those types of things will get you in trouble because those are things that we can easily go and guess, right? And again, using the same password kind of across the board becomes problematic. So passphrases are important. Also, password vaults, another area of protection. And you know, with password vaults specifically, you know, you can have a different password for each site and it automatically generates them. So, you know, having a different password for each site, or at least, you know, for things that are like low-hanging fruit that you don't really care about if they get compromised, okay, that might be one password. But your sensitive data, maybe where you keep your photos, your personal computer, or your financial information, your banking, all of those using complex passwords, I think, is really possible. And most people don't know you can put spaces in your password.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And really, you know, it takes seconds, minutes to compromise a short password, right? So, and it's a simple move. It's a simple, easy move that significantly increases your security if you move to a passphrase.
To give some statistics, to crack a 9-character password takes hackers about 9 seconds to 2 minutes, depending on the complexity.
Using software and that they can get anywhere.
Using software that you can go and
Free.
download directly from the internet. In fact, it uses your graphic processor. So you know what your kids play for video games and those types of things? You can use graphic processors to compute mathematical algorithms much faster that actually crack passwords at a much elevated rate. So you can use graphic processors to crack a 9-character password in just a couple of minutes. And that's every single instance combination possible. So even if it's super complex, it's not going to slow us down in any way, shape, or form. That's why going to these passphrases, longer passwords, make a really big deal.
So we're going to go into a video that talks a little bit more about 5 easy ways that you could really protect yourselves. And David, I don't know if you want to give any more intro to the video.
So this is something I did on Business Insider, and it was a great video talking about the top 5 things that you can do to really protect yourself, just not only at home but also your businesses, which I think is really important. And you know, you look at what hackers can do, and a lot of the attacks that these are not super sophisticated. They're very basic things in nature. So there's 5 things that you can do personally that can lock your information down personally at home, but also your businesses. And you know, for small businesses, some of these examples are really important. Like one of the ones that you're going to see is going to be, you know, what do you do for 2-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication? All of these things are really important to actually implement in your organization, and things that can really drastically protect yourself against hackers. Mr. Robot is probably one of the most accurate portrayals of what hackers can actively do. If you're interested in hacking and don't understand a lot of this, the TV show itself actually employs hackers to work on the show to depict real-life hacks that could happen in real life. And it's a very, very accurate portrayal of everything that we see in today, from being able to hack smartphones to getting access to a big corporation and being able to bring them to their knees from a cyber perspective. So what's the top 5 things that you can do to make yourself more secure both at your business and your home? Number 1, use 2-factor authentication or 2-step verification everywhere that you can. Your banking systems, Twitter, Facebook, all support the ability for you to enable an additional security feature that you may not know. If you go to your settings, it's in there. You can enable it, and every time that you log in, it'll register your computer, and you can then get a text message to go into that system as a second form of verification. And why that's important is because if a hacker gets access to your password, they still have to have access to your phone to get access to your account. And that's really important by enabling that specific security step, probably number 1. Number 2, don't use the same password everywhere. I know it's hard, but using the same password everywhere is one of probably the easiest ways that we break in as hackers. So if you have the same Twitter password as your same banking information, those are things that can get you in some serious trouble. Number 3, make sure that you stay up to date. Those security patches. Every time you have a Windows update that says, hey, I need to update your computer, it's usually to fix a known attack that hackers have figured out to get access to your computer. So keep up to date. Whether you're using a Mac, they aren't impervious to attack, or using Windows, same thing, update your systems. That's the most important thing. Always keep up to date with what you're having out there. Same thing for third-party applications. If you're using Java, Adobe, PDFs, Office documents, those are all things that you want to keep up to date, and that makes it much harder for us as hackers to break into your system. Number 4, social media. Be careful with how much information you actually put online. We as attackers can look at that. Look at what you do, your spending habits, what you might be doing from a day-to-day perspective, going and buying Starbucks at a certain location. Those are all things that we can use to identify when you're going to be out of the country or when you're going to be at a business meeting. We can use that as a method to attack you. One of the main things that we do as hackers, especially when it comes to social engineering, is we create a sense of urgency. Something that you're familiar with, but you have to take action upon. So let's just say, for example, I'm a Verizon customer and I have an Amazon package that's getting delivered. Well, if I, as an attacker, know an Amazon package is getting delivered, sending a text message from a Verizon customer support service line coming from Amazon saying, hey, your package is being rerouted, you need to log into the site to get it delivered again, is something that an attacker can use. So those are things that attackers can leverage is urgency, how you actually operate, and all that information that you post online are things that we can use as attacks. And last but not least, personal information. That's one of the biggest things that attackers can leverage to get access to your data. Things like social security numbers, your credit card numbers. A person is not going to call you on the phone from a banking service and ask you for that type of information. So whenever you get a call that's too good to be true, or a call that is a fraud services line, call them back. Look at the number on the website themselves and call it back. Because a lot of times attackers will impersonate financial services, they'll impersonate different organizations to try to get your personal information and use that to be able to make fraudulent charges. So when it comes to that, your phone, verify first. Go to their site, call the site itself from there, and then call to an actual person that's actually at that institute itself. And when I was on the Katie Couric show, they wanted me to live hack somebody in the audience, and I noticed on their Facebook account that they were awaiting a package. It was around Christmas time, and they were awaiting a package to be delivered for their young one. And I, of course, as a bad hacker, playing a bad hacker, took advantage of that. And I sent her a text message saying that her package was not going to be delivered in time unless she went to the expedited shipping, which is free. And so she had to click a link, and she went to that link, and I stole her username and password, and then I was actually able to compromise her computer and then eavesdrop on everything that she was doing in her house. So on the Katie Couric show, I was actually able to enable her webcam and show her daughter walking through the house. It was real scary stuff. So the personal information is on there, and also being very careful on the types of information that you actually give to people on the phone or through your emails. I did one really recently where I was able to hack into somebody and impersonate somebody from a credit card company, and I just provided us a little bit of information about them, and then they opened right up and were giving me their full credit card number, everything else that they were doing out there. And so, being careful. No one's going to call you and ask you for your full credit card number. No one's going to call you and ask you for your social security number. There's a lot of things that I think, as a person, you can do a little bit better just to protect yourself.
Yeah, and I think for businesses, they really need to take kind of that defense in depth look, right? So that broader look at the controls that they have in place, the training that's there for the employees, and there's no silver bullet, right? So, and I always refer back to the basic blocking and tackling, vulnerability management, patch management, having a solid incident response plan for cyber, and then also practice playbooks as well for incident response. I think that is so important to make sure that you're practicing different scenarios and making sure you understand how your company would respond, who would you call in, what third parties would you work with, to make sure you got yourself back online. Especially important for mid-sized and smaller companies that don't have hordes of cyber professionals working for them that could quickly respond to an incident. So I think those are very pivotal things for organizations as well to be aware of.
Yeah, having a cybersecurity program where you're actually testing out your incident response and testing out simulations and attacks against your environment is so beneficial. We go into a lot of companies where they have no plan whatsoever, and their entire company is shut off, and they're losing money every single day. And we have to come in and basically try to figure out, a mess of things where they have no plan whatsoever. And it's already 48 hours after the fact, or they've already lost the money, or they've already paid the money. There's a lot of different variations that happen when you don't have a good plan in place. And making sure you have good playbooks that you can actually run through simulations and understand how to respond to threats as they happen. knowing that threats are going to happen towards your organization. We're
Right.
living in an age where technology advances at such a rapid rate. And I always say that, we could solve cybersecurity today. If KeyBank had 20,000 employees and you had 20,000 security people, it'd be great because you could just sit behind somebody, and be like, hey, don't click on that, right? But unfortunately, we don't have that luxury, and everybody in our company becomes sensors for us, and really educating our employees and making sure that they understand what's happening becomes important as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've already started to touch on great examples of the things that you should really be doing to invest in your company. So we talked already a little bit about educating your employees. We've talked about, phishing, and it just takes one employee to click on that link. So educating your clients or your employees is more than just having that, which a lot of companies do, having that one and done training session maybe once a year. It really needs to be something that you're talking to the individual from a personal aspect too. I think a lot of times when you start to give them kind of cyber strategies or things to think about in their personal life and make it personal of kind of that's what's in it for me. But talking to them about, phishing, but then here's what it could do in your personal life, not just at work. Making sure that you're doing it consistently. How do they identify fraud? We talked about, like in phishing, hovering over. So reminding people of those things on a regular basis. I know a lot of companies, and if you're not, this is one of the great things you can take away, is actually performing phishing tests on your individuals. And don't make them really easy and very obvious, because as we said, phishing has changed and grown and evolved over time. Not to say that all the bad guys are really sophisticated. I'm sure they're still I still get them, the really bad ones where I'm like, you can't fool me with this. But making sure that you're making them realistic. You mentioned Office 365 earlier. So as you're testing your employees, make them believable scenarios that would entice them to click on it. Because we also want to make sure that if they're clicking, they're reporting it. So it's also, we want to prevent it. But the reality is, if somebody is going to click on it, and if it does happen, you don't want them to be fearful of that. You want them to report it so that you can quickly react as well.
And to that point, it's a learning experience, right? So making sure it's not a hand slap, you're going to get fired today.
Right.
That you're educating, and people learn and absorb things in different ways. So using different media to reach out to your employees in different ways, and really embedding that embedding security into the culture of the organization. So it's not a 1 or 2 time a year training event. It's really just a part of how the culture of the organization runs, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think having people also looking for these types of hackers that are breaking in too, right? A lot of it comes down to education awareness. A lot of it comes down to training your employees to understand what those threats are and really being the first line of defense. But what happens when you actually experience a breach and there's actually an attack that occurs in your environment? Do you have people that can actually identify those and respond to those so that you minimize the damage to the company? And if you look at some breach statistics, it's about an hour and a half. It takes about a hacker an hour and a half once they compromise one computer to be able to move to other systems on the network that has access to your sensitive data. So as a business, you really only have an hour and a half to really detect that initial intrusion and really try to protect yourself. So having people that can actively be looking in your environment to identify those threats becomes really, really paramount.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think as we've all seen with headline breaches, the way an organization responds and moves through a breach, because let's face it, it happens, right? But the way the organization responds and moves through the breach is really often pivotal on how they're going to come out of that on the other side.
That's right.
So having those practice plans where you're running through those and you know what triggers you're pulling when is so important. And I would also say, and I said it before, making sure that you have your partners lined up in advance and ready to go. If you have an indication of a breach or suspect it, you know who you're calling for incident response. You've already got retainers in place. You don't want to be going through lawyers and trying to get those contracts in place as you're in the middle of dealing with an issue.
That's right.
Right. So I think that's so pivotal to have all of that lined up and kind of ready to go and practiced, so you know how you're going to respond.
I can say that from experience. At Binary Defense, we monitor for hackers, intrusions, and things like that, and it's very difficult for us to come in after the fact that something's already occurred and try to help a customer. And you're trying to piece together information. Most of that information's already been deleted or it's not recoverable. You're trying to centralize data where data's not there anymore. You really can't find out how the hackers initially broke in. And we're really trying to piece together a large puzzle, which takes us 10 times longer than it would if you were prepared at the beginning to really respond to those specific threats and minimize that damage.
I think it's also important to practice your communication plans around that too, right? How are you communicating to your executives, your board of directors, your media, regulatory partners, whatever you may have? You need to make sure you have that all lined up and ready to go. Communication is a pivotal piece of any response, right? So you need to make sure you have those in line as well.
Yeah, totally agree. Kelly, do you want to talk at all about the penetration testing or vulnerability?
Yeah, I think so. Any good program has continual testing, right? We certainly do at Key, so that is a huge element of our program. We are continually testing both internally, we do testing ourselves, and then we contract with third-party partners and to help us with that as well. You know, the thought behind that is we want to find any opportunities before the hackers find the opportunities, right? So I think this is such an important element of any program, to make sure that you're testing, you're identifying where you have those opportunities, you're prioritizing them through remediation, and you know, that's just a cyclical process that any organization should have in place. I think it's pivotally important as well to, like I said, get the opinion of a third-party partner, and often several partners throughout the course of a year, a couple years, to make sure that you're seeing things from a different perspective, right? So looking externally, looking internally, looking at, you know, social engineering, susceptibility, and things like that. I think that's just such a foundational element of any program.
And I think you're going to hear a lot of testing, and the reason why you do a lot of testing is to see how prepared you are to really respond to these threats, right? And how resilient you can be to these types of threats as they're happening. And so simulations like what we call penetration testing, which is simulating a hacker trying to break into your infrastructure and trying to identify what flaws you really have in your environment that hackers could take advantage of. Those types of, as you mentioned, the cyclical effects of that really get you into a ability to respond to things much faster, as well as address things in a much quicker fashion. And all those things really make a huge difference for a security program.
Yeah, and you know, honestly, things evolve so quickly in this space. You know, you could do testing 6 months, and then 6 months later, there could be a new vulnerability out there that you're susceptible to that you're not picking up on. So it is really important to just make sure that's part of your overall protection ecosystem. And I think Binary Defense is going to have an announcement once we get closer to the end here about an offer that you're going to have for our clients, right?
Absolutely,
Awesome.
absolutely.
Perfect. I think we talked about a lot of these, but just a couple things we'll kind of double verify with you. So, you know, some key questions that maybe the business should be asking themselves, and we've talked about a lot of things here already of, you know, are you doing regular reporting? Are you doing that testing? Do you know what your current risk profile and what your strategy is and how you would, you know, react if you had an incident? Also thinking about things, and we're not going to dive into it today, but also thinking about things like cyber insurance. You know, does your company have cyber insurance? It's something that you should probably look into and you know, figure out what your company policy should be around that. And we've already talked about bringing in third-party experts and partners to help you. So some of those best practices, we've already hit on many of those, but some additional ones that I think we haven't maybe hit on quite yet. We talked about, you know, the hackers getting into your system and how quickly it is for them to navigate throughout. One of the things that you should be thinking about from a company level is, you know, what are your access rights? How, you know, what type of access rights do I, Tammy, have as a user versus what David has access to? And if David's a technical person and I'm a non-technical person, we probably shouldn't have the same type of access rights and have rights to the same types of systems. Do you have backups available for your data if something like ransomware happens? So thinking about those types of things and setting up those controls, as well as monitoring your accounts on a regular basis. So you know your company better than anyone else. You should be keeping an eye on your accounts and viewing the activity that's flowing so that if something does happen, you can identify it quickly and then notify your bank.
I would also add to that too, a big one is, do you know what your critical assets are as an organization?
Yeah, that's a great
and that's
point.
going to be different, you know, by organization, right? So do you know what you're trying to protect?
Right.
Most organizations don't know.
Most don't, right? So I think that's a key piece, understanding what those critical assets are, and then you can start to understand how best to protect and secure them.
Right.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Most companies don't have a good understanding around what the risks are towards the applications that they're using and where their data really resides
Right.
and being able to build defenses in to those. And we recognize, I think, in IT that we can't secure everything. We can't, you don't need to get a blood sample and a hair follicle every time you log into your computer, but making it, a decent practice around security around those systems, especially around critical assets, can make it much more difficult for hackers to break in.
Yeah. And it helps you understand prioritization too, right? So, and I think that's really important.
Yep.
Okay, so how could you leverage us here at KeyBank? So if you're using our online channel for Key Navigator, we mentioned some of the things, making sure that you're reviewing on a regular basis what access rights your individual users have. And there's also a lot of built-in controls that you could be using. So we talked earlier about things like business email compromise and wire and ACH fraud happening. So making sure that users within your company that you're set up for dual controls. So those are something, another one of those kind of no-brainer things that you can do. So that way, if for something, if an individual user clicks on something, a phish, and somebody has gained access to their credentials, if you have a second user then where approval is required, it could prevent that ACH or wire from going out the door. There are also lots of services depending on the type of fraud you're looking at, like things for positive pay for your checks, where you're validating if something isn't matching the file that you're sending in, as well as things like you pick for ACH and then ACH Direct. So there are a lot of services that you could sign up for that are going to protect you against those certain types of individual fraud. And really in security, it's all about layers, right? You're trying to make it harder and harder for that hacker to get in and get access to your money, to your data. So it's all about layering in those controls. We also have the number up there. If you are a KeyBank client and you are seeing a fraud, there's the number that you could call in. You could also contact your payments advisor or relationship manager or Key Navigator support as well, and then they can help you. And then also we talked about reporting phishing email. So it's important for you to report those so that we're aware of them and we can put filters for those types of things. So if you're seeing something coming through, you can forward that to reportphish@keybank.com. And then we have a special offer for those that are listening to our session today from Binary Defense. I don't know, David, if you want to talk a little bit about it.
Well, before I kick into this, one thing I want to mention on the business email compromises as well as another point is that if you get hit with something like that and you fall from a business email compromise where you've already wired the money out, you can still recover those funds. You have a 48-hour to 72-hour window to actually recover those funds. So if you notice that it happens, it's paramount that you report it immediately to your financial institution and to the FBI. And you can get that money typically recovered, at least the majority of it, if not all of it, recovered within a 72-hour window. If it's past that, unfortunately, you pretty much lose that money and it's gone. So even though the money may show and reflect in the other bank account that it's there are ways to retrieve that money, especially as it's going internationally. A lot of times, they'll go to Shanghai or Hong Kong as ways to route money out through a number of different locations. So just be aware of that one specific that you can recover those funds pretty quickly.
I think it's important for businesses to know too that they need to have in place solid policies and protocols around money movement, right, within the organization, because as we said earlier, a lot of times these will come in a phone call or an email with a sense of urgency, end of the day, need to do this right now. I talked to your CFO.
Usually on a Friday too, by the way. Yeah.
So, make sure you have those protocols in place on how that should occur. Dual control is always good. And what do you do if there's somebody who's part of that dual control who's out of the office, right? Who's the backup? How are you going to handle that? Having those documented and actually practicing those, I think, is really important too, because a lot happens that way.
Yeah, especially one thing we've seen too is over the holiday season, because a lot of times people are out of the office for vacation. So make sure that you're not only educating the people that are doing it day in and day out, but the reason why you want to test and practice is you could have somebody that, Christmas break, sometimes people take vacation. Well, is that backup person that's doing the approval privy to the procedures, and have you practiced it so that when they're stepping in, they're not an easy target?
And how are you identifying that person? If they're calling in, they're getting more sophisticated now where they can mimic somebody's voice, right? So how are you verifying that the person who's asking you to move that money is really the person that's should be asking that, right? So having those protocols in place is really important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So one thing we wanted to do is for everybody here on the webinar today is offer up a free complimentary cybersecurity assessment. And what we would do is take a look at your business, identify what exposures you have, if there's any flaws that hackers could take advantage of to hack into your businesses, as well as comb the dark web. Is your information being sold on the dark web? What type of information is there about your company or its employees? And really give you more of a picture to be able to present to you and say, listen, here's everything that we're able to find just based on your organization that's out there today. So you can sign up on binaryDefense.com/risk, and you can use the promo code KeyBank, and that'll get you a free assessment to really go through and understand what is kind of happening out there, what's going on for your company, and really what exposures you have towards your business.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy to help out. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the great thing is we will be sending out a follow-up information regarding this. So if everybody's furiously writing down binary defense and keyword code, we'll be sending that out. So no worries, we'll get that information out to you so you can take advantage of that. So now what we're going to do is open it up. I know we have been queuing up some questions that you've been sending through the chat, so we'll go ahead and start to take a look at those. And with that, the first question. So we have received emails from current clients that were sent from. All right, so we have received emails from current clients that were sent from their real email, but they did not send them. So it sounds like there was some type of email compromise.
Yeah.
What software or programs would catch these emails before they're sent to us?
Yeah, the problem you run into that one specifically is that even though they didn't send them per se, they actually did send them from their account. Right. So what will happen is that they probably weren't using two-factor or multi-factor authentication. That's most commonly what we see. So the person that you're already dealing with, your current client, didn't have two-factor authentication on. They're able to get the username and passwords, and what they'll do is they'll search through the email for invoice, money, any type of thing that they can make any type of buck off of. And then what they'll do is they'll create what are called Outlook rules, and the rules will then, anything that gets sent from that will automatically be deleted, so the user doesn't see anything that's actually happening, and the emails are actually sent in that specific case. So those are really challenging to protect against because it's coming from an already trusted source that you've already sent emails back and forth from. So my recommendation there would be use two-factor or multi-factor authentication for Office 365 or Google for Business or whatever your company uses to try to prevent those from actually happening in the first place. Also, from an incident response perspective, it's also good to see to look for what are called Outlook forwarding rules. Outlook forwarding rules, when a hacker breaks in, he's going to forward all those emails to the attacker's machine so that they can see all the emails that are actually coming from that account that they compromised. Taking a look at all the rules that you've developed in there, you can look through all of those and say, okay, these don't make sense, and these are probably compromised accounts that we can take a peek at and look at from an incident response perspective.
Yeah, and one thing I would add there too is I'm assuming that when they did that, they probably weren't just emailing you to say hello. Likely there was probably something, I'm going to venture a guess here, that maybe they were asking you to change payment instructions. One of the things from a business email compromise perspective that I've recommended to clients before is that if you get an email like that, because we know email can have some problems with it, that you kind of kick it old school and call somebody on the phone when you're changing vendor payment instructions for something. So don't just take that email and say, oh, okay, they want me to send that $1 million now to this weird account somewhere that doesn't make sense. But instead, pick up the phone, use a known contact number, right? You have that vendor relationship. We talked about third-party risk. So making that phone call, it only takes a second. Hey, I saw you sent an email, just want to verify that you want me to update that payment instructions, and take that extra step so that way you're not then sending that money and then realizing after the fact when you're getting a phone call because the bill is late because they haven't gotten payment that happened.
That's right. Absolutely. All right, let's go up to question number 2.
All right.
And for question number 2.
Oh, so what happens when a hacker is changing bank details during a transaction?
When a hacker doesn't typically change banking information during a transaction. The transaction is usually authorized once they compromise a bank account in the first place. So when they'll compromise a bank account, and then from there they'll typically wire money out of that. And then what happens though is that it'll go to one location, then it sprawls out to a number of other locations where it's much harder to trace and track. And so when that happens, it's very difficult to recover those funds. That's why we'd mentioned, within the 48 to 72 hour period, it's really important to kind of recover those funds to get them back there.
There was a good one down. I don't know if we want to go down to maybe 15. If someone has hacked my system, is that permanent? What breaks their ability to get into my computer? So no, not permanent. You can recover from a breach. Again, it's important to make sure you've got a solid incident response plan, and if you're a smaller organization that doesn't have a cyber team on site, that you align with a partner that can help you detect and eradicate the footprint on your network and get you back to operating, right? Backups are super important, making sure that you can recover your systems
Yeah, I would say
else,
too,
Danny?
having people that understand how these break-ins occur, that can respond to those. That's one thing we do here at Binary Defense. When hackers are breaking into computer systems, how do you respond to those, and how do you get that stuff off of your computer so that's no longer there in the first place? And I think having people in place to be able to do that is really important, understanding the type of threat that you have and then being able to respond to those.
Yeah, and even large organizations, like I said, smaller, mid-sized, but large organizations have partnerships with others that can help in those type of situations to quickly understand the depth and breadth of what we're dealing with, and then how to move through that effectively, right? But again, if you're trying to pull those plans together, if you're trying to find those key partners while you're in an incident, you're way too late. It is how a company moves through an incident is really going to determine how they end up on the other side, right?
That's right.
We've seen some pretty major breaches, and the companies have walked away pretty good, pretty okay from it, right? They've learned a lot in it. They've improved the processes. We've also seen significant breaches that have just completely taken companies down.
Yeah, one thing we have a 24/7 security operations center here, which is monitoring for hackers breaking in, and we'll see intrusions happen all the time where a company, a user clicks on something, they open up a document, and their computer's hacked, right? But we literally respond to those and we minimize the damage, and we contain that system so that it can't spread to the rest of the organization, and all of a sudden we've saved ourselves a breach. Goes to your point about being prepared on those specific incidents and really having the people in place, being able to monitor your systems, being able to protect yourself, and then when something actually happens, being able to respond to those to minimize the impact you have to your business. Backups are huge. Making sure you have procedures in place, playbooks, all those things become critical.
So here's another one. Any benefit to twice monthly random large set of fake phishing emails, and then do some security training. So yes, huge benefit to that. That is something that we do at Key with our employees. We phish a large amount of employees every single month, and the phishes that we send out get more and more challenging month over month. If they fail that particular test, then there is automatically awareness education that's delivered to them. So I think it's important not only to do that just a once and done, to continue to do that testing and awareness with employees. They'll start to recognize more suspicious and more sophisticated phishes the more that you do that. So absolutely, I think that companies should be doing that.
Yep, I would 100% agree. What I can say from, we simulate hackers breaking in, and companies that actually have a good education awareness program that focus on that remedial training, it's much more difficult for us to actually break into those companies because they are looking for things that are unusual. They are looking for suspicious things that are happening, urgency, common ways that hackers are breaking in. So it definitely makes a huge difference from an education perspective when people are doing that more often.
And in regards to spear phishing, I definitely think it makes sense to test your executives as well. To
don't leave them out.
To test them. Don't leave them out. Don't be afraid to test them. I think they're often the biggest targets and the most to lose. So you want to make sure that you are delivering the same type of education to them as well.
As well as their admins, because their admins have a
Admins
lot
have
of
access
keys
to
to
a lot
the
of stuff.
kingdom.
Absolutely.
And remember things like I oftentimes tell people on LinkedIn as well. Like LinkedIn is a great wealth of information. So you can find out that's the admin for the CEO at this company, and so testing the admins as well is really important in spear phishing.
And that training does work.
Yes.
I can tell you that does work. Yes.
All right, so what do you recommend that we secure from documentation from vendors to process wire transfers? First of all, it's important to have a process and make sure that when you're establishing relationships with your vendors that you have known contacts, that you know what their phone numbers are. I think that's the biggest thing I've seen, especially when you're thinking about something like business email compromise. What are those processes and procedures? Who are the people within your company that have the access rights to actually edit vendor payment information, and who is that known contact at that vendor that you can pick up the phone and say, hey, I see a change in information, and kind of establishing that from the beginning. Anything else?
There are secure portals that you can use to deliver email. There's an email encryption, for example, that you can use to deliver secure information. There's what's called information rights management on Office 365. If you use something like Proofpoint for spam filtering, they have the way to send secure email where they kind of have to log into a portal. So there are service providers or providers that you might already have in your current what you're leveraging for Office 365, or you might use a third party. But there are ways to deliver secure documentation to people. But again, that process, I think, to Tammy's point, is really important of having that established first, of how you actually communicate that information back and forth.
All right, so We have a lot of questions, so we really appreciate all the questions that have come in. For those of you that we didn't have a chance to answer your questions live, we will follow up with you individually so that we can get you an answer to those questions. I just want to thank both of my panelists for joining me today. And thank you again for joining us, and we will be sending the information, as I mentioned, out to you about the binary defense offer. I hope you take advantage of that. But thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, guys, that was the seminar that we did. I hope you found it very insightful and will benefit you as you work with your employees to get things squared away and make sure that your company is fully protected to the best of its ability against fraud. It is always changing and evolving. I would encourage you to continue to educate yourself on what's going on out there and look to your partners to give you the education that you need to make sure that your accounts and your business are protected the way that they should be.
Thank you so much for that, Nathan. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Also, if you guys have any questions at all, if you want to reach out to KeyBank, but you just would like to have a conversation with us first, we would love to talk to you. You can just email us at support, that's SUPPORT, at PSMA.us, or you can call our office at 888-882-6020. We would love to talk to you, and we could perhaps put you in contact with KeyBank as well. Yeah, and that's all I have for today. Thank you so much, Nathan, and thank you, listeners, and everybody have a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.